In case you missed it, New Orleans Saints wide receiver Michael Thomas was arrested on Friday night. So whether you know about this story or not, you might still be left asking two big questions. Will he be available on Sunday against the Minnesota Vikings? And could there be a long-term impact to this arrest? We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on this rapid fire episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into this episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you as always. Making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, you can always subscribe and follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to keep the conversation going one-on-one with me, take part in our exclusive film studies, Q&As, and breaking news like today, which we tracked all throughout the evening last night, you can become a Locked On Saints insider and get the information first by texting Who Dat to 504-285-7473. As always, I am your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on your favorite social media, your New Orleans Saints expert, credential member of the media. You can find me at Saints News Network, Tuesdays on the Locked On NFL podcast, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. We're just taking a look here, 5-10 minutes on the big story around New Orleans Saints wide receiver Michael Thomas. Usually we do an In Case You Missed It episode here on Saturdays, getting you caught up with all the big five biggest takes of the week. This is the only story you need to know in case you missed it. New Orleans Saints wide receiver Michael Thomas arrested after an altercation outside of his property in Kenner, arrested by the Kenner Police Department. This is now the second run-in with the Saints wide receiver, and that particular police agency or entity, however it is that you want to look at it. This time, the arrest was based on some neighbors kind of calling the police because of some altercations going on. Allegedly, Michael Thomas and a contractor that was working on building a house across the way ended up having an altercation that led to what is now being called a simple battery charge, as well as a criminal mischief charge. We're going to define both of those and tell you what it means long-term for Michael Thomas here in just a moment. But I want to get to the question that I think is the biggest question in everyone's mind right now. Will Michael Thomas be available and thus play against the Minnesota Vikings tomorrow on Sunday? And as of right now, keep in mind that with legal processes and all these things can change very quickly. But as of right now, Saturday afternoon, the expectation is that Michael Thomas will be available and on the field with the New Orleans Saints. He was taken into custody in some way, shape, form, or fashion around 7 p.m. or sometime after 7 p.m. Friday night, and it was booked and released by Kenner Police Department at 10 p.m. on Friday night, meaning that he was able to make it back in time and everything to travel with the team on Saturday. So as of right now, you should expect to see number 13, Big Michael Thomas, out on the field on Sunday. If anything like that decides to change, or if there's any new information that ends up changing that, at Ross Jackson Nola, join the subtext, the Locked On Saints Insiders community. You'll be the first to know, to be able to keep up with all of this news, as well as, of course, all of the fantastic coverage going on elsewhere as well. What we know so far is that he's released, that he's not being held in custody any longer, and that's the expectation that he will play on Sunday against the Minnesota Vikings. So that clears one big sort of concern or question when it comes to the biggest questions that folks are answering. The other thing is, will there be any type of lasting discipline, like NFL discipline, such as a suspension or potentially just a fine? And I think if you're looking at the two charges, which are both misdemeanor charges, simple battery, as well as criminal, I know it says the name of it is criminal, but criminal mischief, which is effectively like damage to property and things like that. And that can range depending upon how much the property is worth. What this is kind of attached to is that allegedly a brick was thrown at a window, but the window didn't break. The police department, the Kenner Police Department statement used the phrase that it led to, quote, little or no damage. So I don't know how you throw a brick at a window and get no damage out of it, but that might be a good thing in terms of the situation here, or certainly would be a good thing for Michael Thomas in terms of this situation. And then maybe damage to the phone or something like that, that the contractor was using as he was trying to record Michael Thomas and film things and stuff like that that was going on. There are some additional reports about, trespassing, and there's some question marks about, how, egregious the filming was and things like that. I don't have any of those details. I'm all good on those details. The biggest thing, though, is that right now, what we're being told by the local police department is that these are misdemeanor charges for Michael Thomas. So what that means is that there are maximum penalties, 6 months in jail, or imprisonment of 6 months, as well as up to $1,000 fine by the city/state, whatever it might be. But those are just maximums. We don't really pay that much attention to maximums. Very likely there's no minimum on this. Maybe nothing will happen, or this gets settled a different way. Whatever it is, that's probably going to happen away from the public eye. Very unlikely that that ends up continuing to be a part of the news cycle moving forward. And so with that being the case, it seems unlikely that the NFL even gets involved in this, much like the speeding ticket and the speeding arrest and reckless driving arrest for Chris Olave. This is very unlikely to be something that the NFL steps in on. Generally speaking, across the history of the NFL, when it comes to suspension level discipline for players in result of or in response to battery cases, it's aggravated battery, i.e., an altercation involving a weapon or involving major damage that requires medical attention, right? And we're talking about non-DV cases in the midst of that, non-domestic violence cases in the midst of that. So for this, which is just kind of this altercation that happened between two grown people, I don't know if the NFL really gets involved in this unless it somehow escalates to larger charges at some point, but that just doesn't seem like the way that this would usually go. And at the most, considering that Alvin Kamara had sort of that aggravated battery charge and things like that were a part of his initial dealings and all that, it seems very unlikely that Michael Thomas would be suspended for anything more than like a game at the most, if that were to happen. But instead, this feels something more like a fine. I'll take you back to the Aaron Donald bar fight situation and things like that. Like, we've seen things like this that are, and I would still put the Aaron Donald bar fight thing as a larger altercation than what this sounds like it was, but that's just me personally. So that's what we know so far in terms of what happened. There will be new details that will continue to come out. So this is not final by any means. This is a developing situation, but I wanted to mainly answer the two questions. Will Michael Thomas be available on Sunday against the Minnesota Vikings? The expectation as of right now is yes. And then will there be any type of long-lasting impact? Maybe a fine from the NFL, but I don't know that unless this escalates, the NFL gets involved in this at all. So that's my expectation as of right now. I am no law expert or anything like that, but just based upon looking at the track record of the NFL, which granted is remarkably inconsistent in legal dealings, it doesn't seem like there's anything that should come from this if it remains as it is. That's kind of where we are at the moment. So, okay. That's our update so far. I will see you again tomorrow after the game against the Minnesota Vikings, live from US Bank Stadium, win or lose, a game that we're expecting Michael Thomas to still be a part of, and that I kind of expect Michael Thomas to kind of ball out in this game right now, because I have to imagine that this is infuriating for where he is at the moment. So it'll be interesting to see how things go with him out on the field, but I imagine there's going to be a little bit of an extra charge for Michael Thomas, who's also coming off of a 0-catch game as well. So we'll see what happens here. All right. If you have any other questions, at Ross Jackson Nola, and then of course text Who Dat to 504-285-7473. Join the Locked On Saints Insider community. I was up until like 2 a.m. keeping everybody up to date with what was being shared, what I was hearing, the conversations I was having, all of those things. It's an easy, quick way to get all of that information. So feel free to come and check us out. Appreciate y'all, as always, for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day, every day. And of course, for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.